I guess that you're all interested in Ayurveda, is it correct? Yeah, and yoga? Sinim? Yoga? Okay. Okay, so if you're interested in Ayurveda and yoga, then you're very much obviously interested in improving yourself, not only in the level of the physical, mental and emotional, but certainly the spiritual. And if we know that, we can also apply that knowledge and understanding to those around us, so they also benefit. So when I'm given the opportunity to lecture and to teach about this Vedic knowledge, I feel very honored. So I'd like to thank Kim Young-soo. Thank you for inviting me today to speak with you. Excuse me. When you think of yoga, you probably think of mostly what?
Stretching.
Stretching's good. Okay. Okay. Sinim? That's right. Okay. So let's talk about that full range. So the purpose of today's lecture is to establish the unique qualities. First of all, I'm going to recognize the unique qualities of my masters, and to clarify what yoga is. I always feel that I'm speaking out of my throat. I don't know. Sorry. So to clarify what yoga is huge, actually, the study of yoga. And to explain how integral yoga practices with Ayurvedic healthcare techniques develop the whole individual. And how these two come together to bring an individual to enlightenment, because that's really what I hope we're all interested in. Are you interested? Yeah, of course. Okay. Also, I'm going to talk about how the Vedic literature, the Vedic science, which you may be familiar with or may not be, is really talking about how to prepare the body in all levels towards enlightenment. And you may be surprised how huge that is. The Vedic knowledge or science is thousands and thousands of years old, pre-Buddha. Pre-Buddha. Buddha was fortunate enough to come in contact with that knowledge through the Shankaracharya tradition from the north, and those great siddhas, those great yogis, would have been summoned by his father to teach the young prince, because they were the highest scholars of the time. And I want to show you something that's very unusual. Perhaps some of you know, but maybe not all of you do. And that is how this knowledge was taught through the use of icons. Icons which unfortunately have only become visual experiences for people to identify with as gods. But in fact, they are not gods. And we'll talk about that and explain it. This knowledge has been kept secret for thousands of years, particularly with the constant invasions of different cultures into India. And those cultures usually try to destroy the culture. Korea has had that experience throughout the ages. And the one that's most still very much in the minds is the Japanese invasion. And young people had to learn Japanese. They had to succumb to that. A lot of the traditions of Korea were either destroyed or not spoken of. So the same thing happened to India, but over and over again through thousands of years. In that case, that great knowledge of yoga, meditations, and tantric techniques were hidden or kept hidden by scholars, yogis. Either they went into the caves of India, or they just didn't speak of it. Consequently, over generations, the general population had forgotten about those techniques. And if there was no particular student who came up to those yogis to learn it, to maintain it, it had been pretty much almost disappeared. Fortunately, in this age, this very, there's the idea this is a very dark age. This is Kali. This is a time of destruction. But a time, because of the suffering is so great, an opportunity for everybody to get enlightened. because we're tired of it. We're tired of suffering. Now our suffering certainly at this time may not be as bad as some people in the past, certainly in Korea during the wars, but still we have this yearning to relieve a lot of our mental suffering, whatever it might be. So it's an opportunity. The dark age, there's always an opportunity to go towards the light. So we'll talk more about that. Later on, you're going to have the opportunity. Now we only have one Korean. Sinim, where are you from?
I'm Russian.
Russian. Okay, very good. All right. So I was going to say, when I have a lot of Koreans here, I say Koreans love to take tests. So I have a test for everyone. I don't know how Russians, if they like tests. Are you both of you from America or?
U.S.
U.S.?
I'm from Europe, from Lithuania.
From where?
Lithuania.
Oh, Lithuania. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm not fine-tuned to your beautiful accent. Okay. Okay. So we're all familiar with it. Actually, they're questionnaires. Last time I gave a questionnaire concerning your body type, but this time we're going to also look at your mental constitution. And we're going to look at that in terms of Ayurveda and your health. And the obstructions that emotional fetters can be in the way of pursuing enlightenment. So we're going to talk more about that. And finally, you will directly experience the ancient, and I'm talking, tens of thousands of years of a chant called the Rig Veda. And within that, I'm going to show you how that's going to actually enliven and help harmonize the brainwave function. And when I speak about the science now, for many, many years, of course, until the modern age, the teachings, all the beautiful teachings that the great masters brought out couldn't really be verified by science at that time. It was, for most of us who are ignorant, we'd just say, well, I hope this is going to happen. I hope I can reach enlightenment. But now neuroscience is sophisticated enough, in fact, to measure brainwave function. And they've measured since the 1970s, perhaps the 60s, but in the 70s they published the results of their research of yogis, high-level yogis, from many different traditions, not just Indian traditions. And they found something uniquely different in their brainwave function than the average person. And that is the brainwave function is more coherent on both hemispheres and from front to back. Not only is it more coherent, the brain wave itself, in terms of amplitude, is higher. Now, we don't always, unlike Sinim, we don't have the time as householders maybe to meditate or do the practices on a regular basis, or maybe just a short time during the day. But what they found, these scientists, they wanted to take the students of these teachers who are practicing these techniques and check their brainwave function. And what they found was, in fact, their brainwave function was, over time, was improving, was becoming coherent, not only during the practice of meditations, but outside. It continued outside of the meditation while they're in activity for some time. So the analogy given is that, in India, how they dye a cloth is they dye it in the dye, it comes out, it's very brilliant, but then they leave it to the sun fades it. And over a period of time of doing that, eventually the sun doesn't fade it when it dries it. So like that, if we meditate regularly, even as householders, twice a day, we can establish over time that pure consciousness or that coherence of the brainwave function. So we'll talk more about that. But I would like to introduce to you just briefly my masters. And I do this because I really feel extremely appreciative of these people. When I was a young woman, well, I still like to think of myself as a young woman, but I'm not. When I was 23, I decided to study more seriously with a great master. You know, at that time, I was very arrogant. I thought that, sure, I can become a great master. I mean, these are old guys, and so I respect them and their teachers, and, you know, but someday I'm going to be as good as them or even better. So I did the study, and they're very, very patient with a little girl, you know. And I went through the teachings and the teacher training and qualified and all that. It's only that time that I realized what a great master was. Neuroscience, in fact, has verified that the fact, if you're in the presence, simply in the presence of a great master, your brainwave function begins to become harmonized. So you can say, oh, I feel so great when I'm with my master, it's so wonderful, you know. He may not, or she may not say anything, but you just feel better. You feel calmer and more peaceful. It's actually a measurable change in the physiology. In electromagnetic fields, but also if we looked at your blood chemistry, it's changing. So this is why the teaching of people meditating together, just average people like us, meditating together, that with a brainwave function, we affect our environment. So that's why retreats are particularly useful, not only for the individual, but for the community and collectively. I was so excited to hear that in Korea, and there's 2 times a year, that as many as 3,000 monks, which include nuns, meditate. So it's a great blessing in terms of their own, not only the individuals who's in the retreats benefit, but benefiting the environment. All right, could we have, now what I'm going to ask you to do, Shankaracharya, and that is the seat which maintains and sustains the knowledge, all of the Vedic knowledge, all the yogic knowledge, Ayurvedic knowledge of all of India. And I give lectures concerning the Shankaracharya, but we don't have time today. This is kind of give you a taste of some of the things. So he was extremely powerful man. When 9 years old, let me just mention, he announced to his family, and this is documented, that he was going to go look for God. Okay? He didn't, at that time, and we'll see why he thought it was God and not just pure awareness or pure consciousness. And the parents freaked out, of course. But in India, they use astrologers, and they went to an astrologer and they said, listen, you can't keep this boy. He's special, he's going. It took him 5 years of wandering alone. Now his father, of course, I mean, what parent could just say goodbye to a 9-year-old boy, had spies, you know, kind of following around him. And finally, they just got exhausted. They said, he's fine, he's good. For 5 years until he found a master. And he had 3 requirements. The master should never get angry, not use fire, meaning cooking food, and he should be a lifetime celibate. This is a 9-year-old boy thinking this. He finally found someone, and there's very many interesting stories along the way. And at the age of 13, or let's see, maybe 16 now, he attained such a high level that the master said, you go in the forest, just go. Because there was a lot of jealousies, and especially with students who had been there for 20 years and haven't achieved that high attainment of awareness. He was alone and eating raw foods and in silence for more than 40 years. I can't imagine it. I mean, wish I could maybe do that, but maybe not. Anyway, finally he was summoned to come out because the Shankaracharya had died. They couldn't find a replacement who was qualified at the level of consciousness needed, and they, summoned him and over again, and finally he came out. So he came out actually as an older man, and wasn't there very long. Next slide, please. His beloved and most cherished disciple was Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. Perhaps you've heard of him. The wonderful thing about Maharishi is that when Guru Dev, or his master, died, they float the great saints in the Ganga, or they bury them in the Ganga, in the river. They weigh them down. So if you go to the Ganga, you may see dead bodies floating there. I have some interesting stories about that in terms of direct experience. Maharishi loved him so much, he would sleep by his bed and anticipate his every need. He went out in the boat to drop the body, and he dove in. Now, you don't need to dive in and take the body down. It's weighted, it'll go down. People thought that he may have committed suicide. Now, when this man, Swami Brahmananda Saraswati dropped his body, let's say this is the Ganga, it was packed for miles and miles and miles with people from India. Maharishi didn't come up. He didn't come up, he didn't come up, he didn't come up. And according to what eyewitnesses, they didn't see him for 15 minutes. They thought maybe he swam to the side. No one reported. He came up at the same spot, but he came up with the Rudrash beads of his master. Went into silence for 3 years and came out. And when he came out, because Guru Dev had told him to establish, now bring out this hidden knowledge. It's time. The world's, in pretty bad shape. It's been in bad shape, but it's not going to get much better. Bring it out now. Bring it out of India. Never could these techniques come out of India. In fact, Maharishi was chastised for bringing them out. But his assignment was to establish Ayurvedic centers and meditation centers, Vedic centers, bring out the knowledge all around the world, and he accomplished that in his life. He died at the age of 90 in 2008. I was lucky enough to be with him. He whispered the mantras in my ear. I spent some time with him. And this is a man who only needed to rest his body 2 hours a night. He didn't sleep consciously. His consciousness was always awake. And we'll talk about how that happens. So, and they had young men, I'm saying, in their 30s, they had shifts of 4 attendants or secretaries with him just to keep up with him. And the last time I saw him, he was 79, and we had a meeting for 18 hours straight, and he was as lively when I went in as when we went out. There was a group of us. I mean, we were exhausted. I was 45 years old, and I was ready to drop. And he's just, and he doesn't use drugs, okay? His drug is pure soma. So we'll talk more about those things. Can I have the next slide, please? Swami Satchidananda, perhaps you know of him. He established centers in North America and Europe. But his prime interest was to take the 8 limbs of yoga, of Maharishi Patanjali's yoga, and choose those practices which were usable to householders. As Sinim probably knows, there's a lot of practices that take a lot of time and are quite, restrict a lot of certain activities, or there's certain rituals that one has to go through, and it's not practical for a householder. It's a life's choice. So instead of discouraging people from practicing yoga, he chose those things that could be integrated into a householder's life. So I had an opportunity to study with him and receive his teachings. Next, please. This is Lama Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche. He's 90. He practices White Tara, which is lifelong, and health. I don't know what it would be compared in Korea. I think there is a female, sorry? Is there some deity or practice that to a female part of, female energy of Buddha, perhaps? Who would that be? Yeah, maybe. Yeah. Anyway.
Bodhisattvas, it's not female or male.
Okay, of course, but there's certain energies that are identified, at least through the Tibetans, that, and we'll talk about why it's sometimes necessary to have a male or female image for the average person to identify with. Though the higher knowledge is, as Sinim has said, there's no gender. Okay. So I was fortunate to study with him, and actually that was my first in-depth study of Buddhism. Okay? Before that, and what I realized was Buddhism and the Vedic philosophy is teaching the same Dharma, just in a different angle of view. Okay? And of course Buddha came after and was actually a student of the Veda. So we'll talk about that in terms of Buddha in the physiology. Buddha resides in the physiology and in the brain. So we're going to move on. Go ahead. Next, please. So before we talk about yoga, because all of you are familiar with yoga, we'll touch on a little bit. So Sinim knows that yoga has to do with the mind, exploring the mind. Okay? It's not only exploring, it's understanding and controlling the mind. From our perspective, we can certainly benefit from the Hatha Yoga or asanas, but actually asanas is a later development of yoga, and it was brought into being, or should I say, to help those who are sitting all the time in meditation to keep the body, physical body, balanced. Let's face it, we have a tremendously difficult task. We want to go beyond the body and integrate pure consciousness and enlightenment, but we have this body that often doesn't cooperate, and we have to take very good care of in order for us to be able to sit and practice for a long time. So yoga was brought in much later than the original practices of yoga for that purpose. Now, if I show you yoga asanas is a strand of hair on my head. My whole body would represent what yoga is. But today, we know that there's hot yoga, meet your boyfriend, girlfriend yoga, diet yoga. That's okay. If the teacher has the knowledge on how to develop, remember, and use those postures in a sequence that's going to benefit not only the body's systems, and I'm talking about every organ, and the brain, and we're going to see why that's important. Okay, so yoga comes from Vedic knowledge. Vedic knowledge is, and it seems very astonishing, Veda is the direct cognition by great masters or seers of the Akashic records. Now you probably have heard some of these phrases or terms, and we won't go into it at this time, but because their meditations are so deep, and they're able to go to the finest of the finest and transcend that, they can come back with, well, let's call it the secrets of the universe, the secrets of life itself. And what can they do? They're masters. They have to pass it on. And they did pass it on in chants. And we're going to hear some of that at the end of our talk. And those chants actually enliven certain parts of your body. Primarily today we're going to have the experience of the brainwave function. And why is that? We are perfect. We are absolutely perfect. But there's parts of us that are asleep, are not fully realized. Now, and I don't agree with this, but scientists over especially the 70s and 80s said, human beings generally use about 5 to 10% of their mental potential. Einstein said he estimated he used 15% of his potential. I don't agree with that. I like to think that given who I know and what we do, we're doing much better than that. How do they measure it? Well, you can't fight, if it's on the graph that shows certain disarrays in brainwave function, you can say, okay, but they put a value on that in terms of percentage. And what do they base that on? The full functioning of an enlightened master, fully enlightened master. Okay? High masters. So, for today, let's say we use 60%. That's good. Okay, 60%. I think 60% is good. Okay. Now remember, Veda is thousands of years old. Tens of thousands. It describes the atom. It describes quirks and swirls and whatever those wonderful things are at the finest level of creation. It defines gravity, it defines waves, weak force, in its own language. But science now and scientists who are reading and studying and comparing identify it within the Veda. It describes the DNA to detail. And within our DNA is our karma, past life karma, our ancestral karma. And of course we know perhaps our ancestors were us. We could have been our own ancestors, right? Depending. Okay, so that's incredible. But then again, think about it. Science still hasn't figured out how the pyramids were made. So there's a lot of knowledge that has been lost or hidden from us, though we seem to have this wonderful scientific age. And then of course from the finest, and that's not really the finest, that's when we start becoming, defining whether we're going to be a human or a frog, to the human body and its functions and its systems, to extraordinary detail. Could I have this next slide, please? Yoga. Listen to this. Yoga. What is yoga? What are some of the definitions of yoga? Sir?
I can't think of one.
Miss? Do you have an idea?
It's probably, no.
Don't think too hard. You don't have to think too hard. Okay.
I would say the science of becoming...
Okay, I'll give you a clue. Yoke. Synonym? Okay, you have an ox. And Koreans, I saw this at a festival a couple weeks ago. The ox is pulling the cart. What is around its neck? Yoke. That's called a yoke. Okay? It's a U-shaped. And the yoke has to do with unity. So yoga, I'm going to use this little Star Wars laser. Look at here. These are the fibers. Does it look like a yoke that would go around an animal's neck? It goes around this way. It's a half of a circle so they can open and put the head in. In the Vedic literature, it discusses in detail these fibers, which is considered part of yoga. This is yoga. These fibers connect every fold in the brain to each other. What's the other part of yoga? Unity. To unite. To bring together. Now the understanding has been, and this is certainly a level that it exists, just like flexibility in the body, practicing yoga asanas, but this is yoga. Connecting the brain, every part of the brain, so it functions as a whole. And this was described in detail. There's 192 sets of fibers or yokes, There's 192 sutras, yoga sutras, describing their function. 10,000 years ago? Next. Okay, this is the brain. It looks like a mushroom. Truffle? Did you ever eat truffles? Yeah. Where are you from in the US?
Michigan.
Okay, they have truffles in Michigan?
I can't remember. I was young when I had them. But I know what they are.
Yeah, they look like a brain, but they're kind of long, a long brain. Can you enhance this, make it bigger, please? So this is the brain, and this is the brain stem. More. Can you do more? More. Okay, stop. This is Sanskrit. In the Veda and the Yoga Sutras describes not only the position of that wave in the brain, but its function. Not only its function as it relates to the movement and the body, it actually is the sound, when chanted, that enlivens that part of the brain which is connected to a particular system in the body. Now we know, let's bounce over to Ayurveda. You know when you don't feel good, you don't want to do much. And you may have a very sunny personality, and your friend comes and you go, oh, don't talk to me. You know, I don't want to feel good. I don't feel good. So our condition affects the way we interact, the way we think, and in fact our practice. We don't want to practice so long, or I'm not going to practice today, or, you know. Or if you do practice, it's not clear. Yeah? So again, Ayurveda and yoga are sisters. They complement each other, and Ayurveda comes up at the same time in terms of description of how to take care of the body at the same time that the Vedas were realized. There's 4 Vedas. We won't go into it today, but in fact, it doesn't show here, but here on the top. But even this channel, there are sutras for. Every part of that brain is the master. And where's the third eye? I don't know if that's the third eye. The pituitary's in there. It is extremely important that we take care of ourselves. And that's why, if you decide to be a monk, no drinking. Why? Affects the brain. Don't see certain things. The optic nerve from this sensory organ goes straight to the brain. It affects every part of the brain. And think of us, we're bombarded every day with millions and millions of sensory, we'll call them enticements, I guess. We choose not to, but they're always there, always there. So going to a recluse area, going to retreat, or retreating from the street for the full day in meditation is very healthy for the brain. But we're householders. We want children, we have wives, we want to interact, okay? How do we protect ourselves, our brain, from, though we choose not to interact with some of these not so healthy things, it still is perceived by the skin, which is the largest organ in the body. It's perceived through all our senses. We'll talk more about that. Okay, next slide, please. Now I'm going to tell you something. Sinim, you live closest to India, perhaps, than any of us. These people. Oh, maybe not. I don't know. It is believed that Indians believe in gods, which is really very different than what Buddhism teaches, right? Right. What happened to India is that the knowledge of what those icons are was lost. Now, in the ancient times, if you were going to teach students something, and it was not, well, you could use Sanskrit or these things, what would you design to teach them the knowledge? Some visual aid, right? A visual. I mean, Buddha has mudras. Mudras mean certain things, right? But after some time, if there's no one to teach you what they mean, then they just become part of Buddha's statue. It's this Buddha statue, it's this Buddha statue doing this, okay? This is Brahma. There's a lot of criticism about Veda, just out of misunderstanding, that it teaches about gods. It doesn't. Brahman with 4 faces correspond to the 4 lobes of the brain. So great masters would use this image, would use this image as a means for teaching about the human physiology. The 4 faces of Brahman have nothing to do with God. But what has happened? If you lose the knowledge, you started trying to personify the icon. You start bowing to the icon. Now, the only saving grace about that is the sutras, the Brahma Sutras that go along with this image, stimulate certain parts of the the physiology and does purify. But most Indians, and I know a lot of Indians, they don't know this. Well, my God is Brahman. Well, my God is Vishnu. Well, my God, and the only God, is Ganesh. So ignorance has created big problems. Next. This is Vishnu. Everything that Vishnu has, Vishnu, by the way, according to Veda, reincarnated 10 times. Vishnu is the maintainer of the Dharma. Dharma is natural law. It's not Buddhist. It's not Hindu. It's not Christian. It's natural law. Gravity has no religious affiliation. Everybody is affected by it. Everybody knows what it does. And all cultures really know what's right or wrong. Okay? It's natural law. Vishnu reincarnated as Buddha, according to the Vedas and the Vedic teaching. And everything, here's these, I mean, how strange is this? All these cobras, and then there's a shell here, and things here, and Vishnu is in the waters, and there's a snake. I mean, what kind of crazy religion is that? Okay, switch. The lotus held by Vishnu corresponds directly to a structure in the brain. What does that look like? Youngsu? What does this look like? Lotus. A lotus with beans, yes. But it's lotus. So Vishnu, can we go back to Vishnu, please? So, actually, in this, here's the lotus, but it's turned down. Every part was used as a teaching tool to explain the structure of the physiology. And I could go into this in detail, but we don't have time. Can we go 2 slides, please? Here's the snakes, the cobras. This is what it is in the brain. And each one of these structures has a very important function in maintaining the balance of the mind for the purpose of enlightenment. If we're balanced minds, we can live the Dharma. And we can see that in society. Those people who are more confused or have big problems, their life and the way they live their life can be very destructive not only to themselves, but to others. Someone who is more aware and practicing, they perform more right action. Maybe not perfect yet. Their discernment is better. So this idea, go ahead next. This idea that these images are gods is the understanding of the lowest level. And it's ignorance. Because the knowledge was lost, was hidden. The great masters were killed. And we know the story here in Korea, when the Japanese infiltrated, the sneaky, they identified who the high masters were, because you can't have the people know and use techniques that are going to liberate them spiritually or mentally. You can't control them. This has happened in every, conquered country. So a lot of masters were murdered, and perhaps their immediate up-and-coming students. So what's left? The students at this level who have attained some levels, but they don't have a master to continue their study and give advanced techniques. So this is what's happened, and happened in India for a long time. Ganeshi. Why would you think this image could protect you? Well, let's see. Next. This is the brain. We're looking at it this way. Okay? Ganesh was designed to teach about the brain. You see the similarities? Okay, I want to read this and make sure I have this absolutely correct, because I don't want to make any mistakes concerning Ganesh here. Too many papers, but let's see what we got. Now, we don't have to get, too technical. So I'll just do it in very simple language. This is the gateway to the brain. What comes out of the brain and what goes into the brain comes through here. Ganesh, in terms of the Indian teaching, the Hindu teaching, is that he's the protector of Shiva's cave. He's the protector of all things. So, people will pray to him and say, please protect me, I'm going to go to travel, protect my children, protect. Well, that's part of the knowledge, but they don't understand the full knowledge implications. So, let's look at the ears. Oops, here we go. Back, this way. Thank you. Oops, no. Ganesh. There we go. So this part of the brain, which is the Ganesh's ears, is the cerebellum, and it governs balance, eye movement, body equilibrium. Now think about who Ganesh and what he does. He's to protect. And think of an elephant in terms of balance. Okay? So these characteristics of this animal is reflected in here. Okay, let's look at the eyes or the face. Same shape in the brain structure. And it controls the awareness and behavioral performance, as well as the ins and outs of the brain. Okay? It's called the pons. Let's look at the eyes. We'll skip some of this stuff. The eyes. These are roots of the trigeminal nerves response to the eyes. Response to this. These are very important parts of the structure of the brain. And they correspond with this. Of course, the crown is the glory, represents this, rest of the brain. So we could go on, and I could give a whole lecture on Ganesh in terms of the human physiology. But the point is, the misunderstanding by people outside of India also think that Indians, all they do is worship gods. Well, they do, if they don't have the knowledge, because the knowledge has been lost. Next. This is the thalamus. It's empty in the brain. This is called Shiva's cave. You know who Shiva is? Shiva is another god. This is complete silence. And this is the beautiful thing that Buddhists talk about, and that those who have understanding of certain principles of Dharma and practice. This is Shiva's cave. And Ganesh protects it. Next. Okay, you've seen this. This is the Shiva Lingam. It's made of stone. And certain ceremonies, Indians will pour milk over it. This is the pituitary gland. And the pituitary, of course, controls all of the hormonal and, systems of the body. Here it is, corresponding a bit. I think it's on the other side, but this is where you go to get it. Anyway, okay? Well, when they do that, they don't realize that they're actually anointing the brain. What is the brain floating in? Liquid. Okay, next. This is Shiva. Shiva has many different artifacts. And again, the snake. This is why they pour milk on the Shiva Lingam. This is pure soma. I don't know if you know what soma is, but soma is a very refined product, which is not really, it's almost physical. It's a product, in fact, of deep meditations and long meditations, and so people who are highly evolved, their face is shining. It's not because they've had makeup or some special oils on their face. It's soma, and it's kind of milky. So that's why they pour milk onto the Shiva Lingam. So fantastic. They missed it, yet they're actually chanting the sutras that go along with this. Now let's look over here. This is the trident. Sorry, it's not very clear, but you know what a trident looks like. Can we have the next slide? There it is, in the middle of the brain. Are you kidding me? Does anybody know what this structure does? Have any idea? It's a very important part of you. I just want to make sure I have it. Don't miss it. Excuse me, sorry. I could tell you, but I want to do it without. In the brain is called the ventricular system. This system helps support and cushion the brain so that it can maintain balance during movement, particularly during any sudden change of a position or turn of the head. So, this is a very important structure in terms of our functioning. Now, if someone has vertigo or some problem with walking, the Ayurvedic physician would know exactly how to, and they weren't born that way necessarily, how to help balance that. Through yoga postures, sometimes through herbs, and sometimes through mantras. Next, please. This is our last one. Anybody know who this might be? Buddha. Yeah. And what does Buddha do? Buddha maintains the Dharma. There's supposed to be one more Buddha coming. Is that correct? Yeah. So nature's amazing. It only wants us to evolve, all beings to evolve. And when we get into trouble and the Dharma seems to diminish, and we can say that during this time, Dharma is diminishing from every point of view. And there's only a few who are keeping it, let's say in terms of the billions of people now, and other beings perhaps, maintaining the Dharma. But when it gets to a point that it's almost vanished, a Buddha will come and establish the Dharma. Now remember that in the Vedic literature, this is a reincarnation of their icon, Vishnu. Vishnu is a representation of natural law to maintain balance and Dharma within the universe. Brahman is considered the creator, but what does it create? Oh, the brain. The brain is a tremendous potential to create. And look all around us in terms of what human beings have created. Okay, next. Here's our brain again. This is a structure within the brain. It's a bit enlarged, but the point is the actual placement of these nerves, ganglia, is quite amazing that it's in that position. It can be attributed to as a part of Vishnu, because we know of Buddha, the neuroscientist in connection with the masters placed it here. So, how does this relate to Dharma? Everything that we do in terms of our practice, from any religious affiliation, to maintain and help structure rightful action, is very important to do. Next, please. Okay, so this, I wanted to dispel the idea that Indians, the Vedic literature, is not connected with Hinduism. It's not a religion. It's a science that has come up for the benefit of human beings to give the knowledge and concern and very detailed knowledge, the importance of, we focused on the brain today, but it talks about every part of the spinal cord, every part of the nerves and senses, the functioning, and how to live one's life so not to stress the heart, for example. The times of the day when we can best eat. Now naturally we may do that. We eat at noon. That's one of the best ways to eat the most meals. So intuitively, men or human beings have followed that. But it's absolutely huge, enormous, the knowledge that is connected with yoga and Ayurveda. And that's just a small part of Vedic knowledge. Vedic knowledge has 40 aspects. Yoga within Vedic knowledge has 4 chapters. And you saw what the chapters are, the 4 lobes and the functioning of the brain. So you can imagine, and I would love to continue forever talking about it, but in other courses, we talk in detail about it. So that you can appreciate even more the value of practice of yoga. And yoga, the main practice of yoga is meditation. The supporting practice are the asanas to keep the body systems moving properly, not just to stretch, but when you do a posture, it actually stimulates a marma point. A marma point in India, which is similar, but not always the same, as acupuncture. And what does it stimulate? In Korean language, gi. In Chinese and Japanese, I think they use chi. In Indian, prana. Now remember, the life force is not pure consciousness or pure awareness. From pure awareness comes the life force. Pure awareness is that unfathomable emptiness which is completely full. Because from there, everything comes out. So if it comes out, it has to be there. And where is it? It's silent until it manifests. So yoga talks about that. But now we're going to do something more practical on the practical level. And that is, we're going to take a test, an Ayurvedic test. Now this test is not only about your physiology, but also your emotional constitutions. Once we know that, we can appreciate the fact who we are. For example, let's see. We don't have, I guess maybe I'm the only Kapha person here. Eugene. This is my dear student and assistant today. This is Eugene Kwan. Eugene is, how old are you now?
23.
Are you sure?
Yes.
He keeps changing his age. I don't know why. Okay, we're gonna, you see, Eugene can never be Arnold Schwarzenegger. He could lift weights every day, eat a lot of food, and his muscles aren't going to grow very big. He can get stronger, but he's never going to bulk up because he's, oops, where are we? A Vata body type. This is what you're born with. This is called your Prakriti. We'll talk more about that. Thank you. But you can use a comparison. Though I'm a woman, I have, can you guess? Okay, actually, no one is just one body type. For example, if you were only Vata, you'd be flying around the room like a butterfly. You couldn't sit still. It's all air, it's all movement. Okay? Eugene is Vata Pitta. So he's not flying around. Okay? Thank you, thank you. So I'm Vata Kapha. When I was 40 years old, I power lifted. 300 pounds was my deadlift. Now for a woman of 130 pounds, that was a lot of weight. My squat is 225. Now women, because we can only build so much without taking steroids, and I didn't do that, was 125. Okay, that's the minimal amount to compete, and I competed in, local type funny things. But anyway, so a Kapha person can build muscle, and I built muscle. Not like the bodybuilders, you go there and get, all greased up. But I have that potential. And also Kapha, and I believe you might be Kapha, a little bit Kapha. What do you think? Kapha Pitta. Okay. So Kapha has a huge amount of stamina. Okay? Vata is a fast starter, but doesn't have a lot of stamina. Now, Pitta, you can see, somehow is in the middle. Pitta, in fact, Sinim is Pitta. Yangsu is Pitta. You have a Pitta quality. I don't believe, can you pull your hair back like this? Not more Vata, I would think, but this gentleman is Pitta, more Pitta, and John I know is Pitta. If you look at your hairline, it's an indication, especially though Sinim shaves his head, but Su, you can see, if there's this part, it means you're very you have your potential for being a scholar and being very intelligent and study is very high. It doesn't mean Kapha isn't, or Vata, but this is part of your true Dharma. Okay? So if you have a Kapha person, Vata person, and you say, you should be a doctor, your mother says, you should be a doctor, you're smart, but you don't want to be a doctor. But a Vata, Pitta person will be more driven to be a doctor or a leader or a scholar in that way, okay? So if we know that, we can appreciate what our life's career could be. This person, in a female, I can never be a runway model. Even if I starve myself, my bone structure is very wide. Okay? Those who are runway models are particularly Vata first and Pitta, but Vata leading. They can eat and eat and eat, and you know, Eugene can eat and eat and eat and he doesn't gain weight. I eat half of what he eats, and next morning I'm this big. Okay? The advantage of that is my stamina is very good. Also, I can not eat for a couple days and not feel it. But a Pitta, I'm looking at Sunim, he's smiling. If you don't get fed right away, you can get a little kind of grouchy, a little bit uncomfortable. Sunim? Yeah. My husband is Pitta, and I'm very careful to get the meal on the table at a particular time. Now I can wait, but he needs to eat because his physiology needs that. When you recognize that, so if you're a Kapha and you're married to a Pitta, and you know you're slow at getting the food on, you're creating some problem, interpersonal problem. But since I understand that, you know, and he understands me, of my body type, the relationship goes much more smoothly. All right? Okay, so I don't see, well, Pittas, John, hi John, do you mind standing up? John is one of my students as well. You see that John is tall. Can you come here, John, please? He's very tall. His hairline, and his hairline goes back. He's a professor. And he also, his appetite is very ravenous. Okay? So, but Pitta is his first dosha. Eugene, Vata is his first dosha. He has Pitta, but you can see he's much smaller in stature. Pitta first, Vata second. Vata first, Pitta second. They have different emotional, but some similar emotional constitutions as well. So, thank you, gentlemen. So I'm married to a Pitta. Pittas can go very quickly. Though we try not to, right, Sunim? A Kapha, it's like the same problem. Kaphas go, well, you know, okay, it's a problem, but don't get upset. Pitta can't stand that. Why aren't you upset? Why aren't you upset? I'm upset. What's wrong with you? No. If you understand the constitution of your partners or the people you work for, you can interact accordingly and keep harmony. And remember, Ayurveda and Veda and yoga are about harmonizing. You can keep the brainwave coherence, coherent. So Eugene, let's give out, we're going to have you quickly take this questionnaire. It's for you. I don't have to see it. Hello? Oh, pencils. And we'll talk about it. Because you come into this world with a particular prakriti. And as long as you understand what your prakriti is, you can also be careful about what diseases can manifest. Because in terms of, let's take pittas, if they're imbalanced, they often get skin problems, skin rashes, and they can develop liver problems. So if you were a drinker, Sunim, he would be more affected by drinking, say the same amount as I do. He would be more affected more quickly because of his pitta constitution. For kaphas can drink a lot and not have usually side effects. I mean, they can become alcoholics, but in fact, pittas can become alcoholics much more quickly. So that's how practical. So you're in a safe profession. Okay, please fill this out. Can we have the emotional or mental constitution, little ones too, please? Don't spend a lot of time. Just, so what's happening now, you have, yeah. Oh, that's right, in the movies, it's like not a good thing, right? I'm sorry. 1, 2, or 3. So read on the left, 1, never, 2, sometimes, 3, most of the time. I think that's the way it reads. Don't take a lot of time. It's only for you, your benefit too. Be honest. And it'll also show you what you really do know or what you don't know clearly about yourself, physically and emotionally.